Hello everyone, with the Americas launching for Wild Rift, I wanted to rehash my beginner's guide so that you guys can get up to speed with how to play the game as quickly as physically possible. Now, what I want to start by saying is this guide will not cover things that you find in the tutorial. A lot of the content that you're going to need to learn the game at a very basic level is available in the Wild Rift tutorial, and I recommend that you go and check that out before delving any further into content creation guides and so on and so forth. I'm also, right now, going to slap my beginner's guide as a card on the screen right now that you can go and check it out from October. A lot of the information in there is good. I will not be repeating all of it in today's guide. Today's guide will be focusing more on how to choose your role, a little bit about some of the more in-depth mechanics of Wild Rift, and then we'll also be focusing on how to win a game from start to finish at a very basic level with some examples. Hopefully you find all of this interesting, and I hope that a lot of you that have now picked up the game in America and in South America are starting to enjoy it and will start to get as many wins as you can on the board. Let's start off though with settings. It is an important place to start off, and I know a lot of you will be interested in which the settings that a lot of the current established players already use. So I'm going to jump into a game and show you settings. Okay, let's talk about settings. Personally, you can set your in-game chat to whatever you like. If you don't want to talk to people on your team or talk to people on the enemy team, you can set it to party only, which means you'll only talk to people you've queued up with. If you don't want to see all chat, which is chat with the other team, you can set it to team. Or if you want to interact with everybody in the game, you can set it to all. I personally like setting it to party or team, especially if I'm not in a good mood. Definitely like to set it to party. Really depends on how you feel. Frame rate, I personally like it as high as physically possible. So I'm on the OnePlus 8 Pro. I should be able to get 120, but right now it's limited to 60. But yeah, high as physically possible while you can get away with it. I like a half-screen scoreboard. So I like the half-screen scoreboard because it means that if I ever want to check the stats, it's not going to completely obscure the entire game, and I can still kind of see what's going on with my character, which is important if you're in the middle of a fight. I like character inking. It turns it off, but I'll show you the difference between character inking and no character inking. You can probably see with Gragas, he just gets a little black edge, which just helps him stand out and helps other characters stand out from the map a little bit more, which can be important with things like skins where they blend into the map and it's a little bit harder to see. I turn screen shake off. No need for that in my opinion. Map brightness as high as physically possible. I like to have the fog of war brightness down because that really accentuates the areas that you can't see. I personally like to have the player name on the health bar, but you can set it to no health bar names whatsoever. You can set it to champion names only, or you can actually set it to the player name. Completely up to you if I'm honest with you. And then floating text, which allows you to see your damage numbers, which I quite like. And then champions at the edge screen, which I quite like. I just keep that on. In terms of the actual in-game sort of, I guess movement and kind of control settings, portrait lock, you should definitely have this on in some capacity. I like priority display. It shows you the highest priority targets near you. I like targeting priority to be low health absolute, just because if you have low health percentage on, sometimes, especially if you're trying to kill the squishier members on the enemy team, if there is a tank with a lower percentage health, they'll absorb the damage from you. So usually I'm never using auto target in team fights anyway, but I do like to have low health absolute as my target priority. I think force attack follow should be turned off in all circumstances, and I personally don't like dash in movement direction. I'll show you the difference between dash in movement direction and having it on and off. So this is dash in movement direction. If I tap my belly slam, I will just go in the movement direction. If I turn dash in movement direction off, it will do it anyway. So you don't really need it in that case, but actually you have a little bit more control, and I prefer having dash in movement direction turned off. Especially you'll find that with Lee Sin, he's a prime example. If you have dash in movement direction turned on, you'll never be able to fully control your safeguard. If you tap it, you'll always dash to the maximum distance. So I think dash in movement direction is better turned off in most circumstances. I have default move stick type. I don't like to have locked button centers. Default action cancel method for cancelling actions. Button layout is something that you'll find you want to set up yourself, but I'll show you how to do that in a minute. I have my button aiming sensitivity relatively low and my dead zone size high. Dead zone is just the area that you have to drag. So whenever you cast an ability, you have to drag it to kind of activate it. And there is a small dead zone. I'll show you here. There's a small dead zone just outside. When it's red, you'll see it. There's a little bit of red there, and as soon as it turns blue. Dead zone size just determines the size at which that circle is before it turns blue. I like to have it a little bit further up, just means I don't accidentally cast any abilities. Aim panning, I like. If you have a global ability, it aim pans towards where you're targeting. Camera pan sensitivity, I'm going to show you, okay? You want it somewhere in the middle. If you have it too low, you can't pan much further than that. If you have it too high, you're gonna be at the other end of the screen instantaneously. So I like to have it somewhere in the middle. I want to be able to see between the lanes. So I want to be able to see up here, for instance, but I don't want to like zip across the map instantly. So somewhere in the middle I find is like the sweet spot for camera's pan sensitivity. Ability minicam, I quite like it, especially for like Lux Ultimate, Ezreal Ultimate, and Ziggs Ultimate, etc. And I don't think semi-lock camera is worth it because you can basically pan the camera anyway in the middle of a team fight, so semi-lock camera is not exactly worth it. Minimap autopathing is absolutely 100% the most important setting that you can have. Minimap autopathing allows you to tap on the minimap and a white line comes up and it essentially shows you where you're moving. So you can tap on the minimap to go where you want and it'll autopath you there. That's probably the most important setting that you can have in the game. So minimap autopathing, absolutely 100%. And those are the settings. If you want to do a custom button layout, you can do it here, and it just allows you to customize and drag all of your bits around wherever you want them. I'm going to move this over a little bit further. Oh, they've allowed you to move that now. You weren't able to move that previously. And yeah, there we go. So you just move it wherever you like, and then you drag this down. And you quit. I don't want to save. I don't want to change anything. I'm pretty happy with where everything mine is. So that is what you can do. You can change all those individual buttons. I haven't changed mine much from the default. I've just spread out some of the buttons and I've moved my active item to a little bit closer so I can activate it more quickly after using abilities. But that is my settings setup. We're going to dive into roles, and then we're going to look at some of the basic concepts of the game, and then we're going to go into how to win a game from start to finish. I'm going to do a quick overview of each lane with some of the champions that are relatively common in those lanes. And starting with the Baron lane, this Baron lane fantasy is usually things like tanks, bruisers, 1v1 duelists. You're often melee. You very rarely get ranged champions in the Baron lane. The jungle, the highest impact role considered by most people. You're going to be playing assassins or tanks or bruisers. You never go into a lane unless you're looking to gank. You're usually farming the jungle and you're the one that controls the objectives. Generally has the most impact in any solo queue experience. Mid lane, a mix between mages and assassins, a very high impact role because you have the ability to roam between your lane and the Baron lane and your lane and the bot lane, and you have good objective control being close to both the Baron and the Dragon Pit. Marksman, a very, very high carry potential role, but does rely on its team quite a lot. You're very low in HP, you're very easy to kill, but you deal a lot of damage, and you have a lot of late game carry potential. And then, of course, the last role that goes alongside is the support role. So when you're playing in the bot lane, you're going to have two players in that lane. The support role often is a mix between tanks or enchanters, and you are there to facilitate and you support your team. Actually a relatively pivotal role when it comes to team fights and early objectives. Some extra information here about all of the roles. This is something that I put together when I did my original beginners list. Again, it kind of explains what each of those roles do individually. The bot lane, usually ranged, sometimes a mage. You farm a lot. You look to get as much gold as possible in the early game, buy those items and have a big impact in the team fights. Supports, they are designed to protect or set up your team, especially your marksman. And again, you can roam a lot towards the jungle and the mid. Got lots of kind of impact potential in the early game especially, and has a lot of potential to engage fights later on. Mid lane, often mage or assassin. You can roam a lot. You can impact the other lanes. You can have roams to objectives. Jungle, very flexible role. Can be played with a lot of different types of champions. You have to be very aware of the map. You have to be looking to gank. You have to be looking to set up objectives. It's probably the most important and most impactful role in the game. And then top or Baron lane, it's often a tank, a duelist, or a bruiser. You're often like in a lot of 1v1 fights, and you can set up your own win conditions with the right setups. So if you want to learn everything about Wild Rift, you could go and watch content creators, you could go and watch my original beginner's guide. However, Wild Rift recently, within the last few months, implemented a really lovely thing called the Rift Guide, which I'm going to show you. You click your play button, and if you can see in your top right corner, there is a little symbol that looks like a small blue square with a notification sticker on it. You tap that, and it brings up this thing called the Rift Guide, which essentially tells you everything that you need to know about pretty much any objective in the game. You can go and zoom into any of the jungle camps, and it will tell you exactly when they spawn and how long they take to respawn. You can click on the big buffs, and it'll tell you exactly what they do for you, and the evolved versions of these buffs. As you can see, the evolved red brambleback, which spawns after 480 seconds. You can go to any of the dragons, including Infernal, Mountain, Cloud, and Ocean, and then also the Elder Ocean, the Elder Cloud, the Elder Mountain, and the Elder Infernal. And this is just a beautiful way for you to learn the game. So instead of me telling you about each individual objective, because it is already there for you as a resource in the game, I would recommend that you go and read through all of these objectives before you start, because it will allow you to understand the game at greater depth. And it's already in-game for you there as a resource. This is a really beautifully produced piece of, I guess, interactive equipment that you guys can use to essentially learn the game at a very, very high level. So I would thoroughly recommend that you go and use the Rift Guide if you are unfamiliar with how any of the things work. Okay, we're going to cover some basic concepts. Now, if you have watched my previous video in October, you will know that I've covered this before. So if you watch my previous beginning guide, you will have seen this before. I'm basically reusing the same footage. I'm just going to explain it in a slightly more advanced way. The first concept is CSing. Now, this is a very basic concept. It's probably the most useful thing to learn to do correctly when you're a new player, because it really is just the biggest source of gold income that you'll have as a laner. But essentially, you get gold for last hitting the minion. So if you deal the killing blow to a minion, you will get extra gold. That is 65 for a melee minion, 40 for a ranged minion, and 85 for a cannon minion, or a siege minion. It's important to do this because it is one of the biggest sources of gold income in the game, and new players in general don't do this effectively enough and often end up falling behind in the game. So actually my single piece of biggest advice that I can give to you as a new player is absolutely learn to CS properly. Secondly, shop. I mean, you guys know this. This is really simple. Items can be bought from the shop. Follow the recommended builds if you're new to the game. If you're then feeling more confident, go and look for content creators who may be playing the champions that you're interested in and look for their recommendations on build. The other way that I can recommend that you do or search for builds is by using the leaderboard. You can actually search the leaderboard for a specific champion. In this particular example, I'm showing you Varus right now, and it will show you the build and the rune setup that the #1 player on the server is using for that particular champion. So it's another way of learning how to build a champion that you can do from in-game as well. It's another useful little tip if you're looking to get the new and most advanced builds. Wards, super, super important, and something that a lot of new players don't do, is warding, especially for protecting your laning phase, but also for setting vision up around objectives, getting vision in the enemy jungle, looking for picks as the game goes on. It's a really, really important thing that, again, I don't think a lot of new players really know how to do properly. So warding is just like something that you need to do. You'll notice it is like the yellow trinket circle that you have. It can be swapped out for a red trinket called a sweeper later into the game. But just make sure you're warding. It provides an area of vision for a small amount of time, and it can used to highlight areas that you can't see on the map naturally as well, like inside brushes or in the enemy jungle, so on and so forth. Another important concept is attack moving, and put simply, it is the process of which you attack and move at the same time. A very, very basic explanation is that you move your joystick to move, and you tap the attack button as you're going, and as long as you're locked onto a target, you will attack and move at the same time. It's good for kiting and dealing damage whilst moving, and it allows you to reposition in team fights, especially as a ranged carry. And again, one of the most important concepts that you can learn as a carry in the game is this process of attack moving. And so the earlier that you learn it, the earlier you try and get to grips with it, the better that you'll find you are when you get towards those ranked games and start climbing the ranked ladder. We're going to talk about some concepts now, and sort of like different things that you may experience as you start to go through the game. The first of which I'm going to talk about is split pushing. This is a very specific tactic. Really just excuse the footage that I'm using. This was from a very long time ago when I was playing on the Southeast Asian server and had an absolutely horrendous ping. But split pushing is the process of which you push turrets in a side lane by yourself whilst your team is busy elsewhere. It's essentially called split pushing because the map is split. You are on one side of the map and your team is supposed to be on the other side of the map doing an objective or drawing attention. If the enemy comes to you to kill you by committing one or more members to the team, one or more members to you, then your team can do something else on the map. And you can also win games by split pushing by just taking towers by yourself. Another concept from the jungle is counter jungling, the process of moving into the enemy jungle and stealing away camps or buffs, if you are as bold enough to do that, to deny the enemy jungle gold and experience. It's a good way to really push a lead that you have over the enemy jungler, but it's also a good way to just at least get some information about where the enemy jungle is as well. Like if you go into their camps and you see like the Krugs or the Raptors are still up, you know that they're probably on the other side of the map, and that also allows you to deliver information to your team about the whereabouts of the enemy jungler. Another important concept is ganking. If you see that someone's calling for a gank or asking you to gank, it simply means that you need to come from the jungle into the lane and look to actually get a kill or alleviate pressure on your lanes. So in this particular example, we just walk in, kick the Ashe, and again, look for the gank. A very basic gank, but that is essentially what ganking is. It's one of the most important things that a jungler can do for their team. So that's essentially everything. That is some really basic concepts that you need to get to grips with in Wild Rift. Oh no, wait, there's one more. Haha. Peeling. This is something that you probably don't see talked about a huge amount, but it's essentially the process of disrupting or blocking enemies who are trying to kill or attack your key team members, and it's often done by the support to protect their marksman or their mid laner. And this is done by just applying crowd control or just getting in the way of the important enemies so that you keep your allies safe. We're going to talk now about how to win a game from start to finish at a very basic level, and we're going to be using this flowchart. This flowchart breaks down the game into 3 stages: the early game, the mid game, and the late game. The early game is from 0 to 6 minutes when the Rift Scuttle spawns. The mid game is from anywhere from the second dragon all the way up to the Elder Dragon, and we usually consider late game 16 minutes plus, which is where we have the Elder Dragon spawning, and the game really tends to accelerate into the later stages. Let's talk about the early game first. This is the laning phase, and often the part where you generally tend to jostle with the enemy laners, whichever lane that you choose to be in. I'm going to show you a perspective of me playing Gragas in the Baron lane. So I'm not going to talk about the matchup specifically, but I am going to talk about what you need to do in the laning phase. There are essentially a few main things that you need to focus on. The first of which is farming. As I talked about previously, CSing is of the utmost importance to gold generation. So you are going to want to make sure you're focusing on last hitting the minions as much as possible, especially as a new player to the game. When you are more comfortable with matchups, you may be looking to do what I'm doing here, which is trading with the enemy laner, taking ability trades with the enemy, looking to come out with a HP advantage. The third thing that you're going to be wanting to do is think about vision and think about where the enemy jungle is. Either be reactive to your enemy jungle or to your own jungle looking for ganks, or be aware of where the enemy jungle is and be aware of where they could be ganking you. Remember, during the laning phase is often where you're going to see the enemy jungle look to make an impact in your lane in the early stages to try and snowball it in favor of their laner. Always be aware of where your jungle is. Look to try and respond to them if they're in trouble, especially when you're fighting around 2 minutes 30 for those scuttle crabs. They may be asking for your help to secure those important early game objectives. Throughout the early laning phase, all the way leading up to 4 minutes, you're again going to be looking to trade, maybe take kills, do anything that you can to sort of generate an advantage at this stage in the game. As we head towards 4 minutes, you may be looking to make a decision around the first dragon. Those decisions usually revolve around, do we fight for it? And especially if you're in the Baron lane, do I move across the entire map to make sure that I can be there to fight for that dragon? In this particular circumstance, you're seeing me move across the map for the first dragon. It may not be something that you always want to do, however, especially if you are a champion that's not particularly good in team fights, or if your team is not doing very well in the early game. You may want to stay in your lane and just either farm up, avoid fighting, or try and take an early tower. Again, this is often the point in the game where early team fights happen, and you will find, especially as you go up the ranked ladder, this is something that a lot of people will fight for, especially if it's an important Drake like Infernal or even Ocean. But again, you can make cross-map trades. The second decision that you may make is around the 6 minute mark when the Rift Scuttler spawns. And again, there is always decisions to be made around that. Again, if you lose the dragon fight, you might not be strong enough to go for the Rift Scuttler, and it may be something that you don't want to risk going for. Or you may have taken first tower already, and therefore the Rift Scuttle isn't as much of an important objective. If you don't know what the Rift Scuttle does, it provides a small minion, or not even a small minion, a large minion that you can deploy that will attack towers for you. It can often be a good way to break open the first tower of the game. In this example, we forced the Malphite and the Vi back, and so we made it relatively easy for us to go for the Rift Skull. The next big objective that spawns after the second dragon, because the second dragon has a lot of similar decisions as the first dragon, do we attempt Baron at 10 minutes? And again, are we in the lead? Have you killed any enemies beforehand? Does the enemy have vision? These are all really important things to consider when going for Baron. My number one tip when thinking about Baron Nashor is do not do it unless you've killed a significant portion of the enemy team, especially if they have long death timers like in this particular example. And we were fighting for this around 14 minutes, which was the first time that the Baron got attempted. And we had sort of 20 to 30 second death timers on the majority of their team. This was a pretty clear and obvious example for when to go for Baron. I can't tell you how many games have been thrown, even at the high elos, where we have gone for Baron and the enemy team is completely alive and they just walk in and kill us and take the Baron away from us. So my number one piece of advice when going for Baron is don't do it unless you have killed a significant portion of the enemy team. Now we talk about the late game. Sometimes Elder is relevant, sometimes it's not. It depends on how far ahead you are. In this particular game, we were so far ahead with the Baron buff that we were able to use this as a game ender before the Elder Dragon was even considered. Elder Dragon spawns around 16 minutes, but a lot of games don't actually get to 16 minutes. And again, the decision-making around Elder Dragon is very similar to the decision-making around the Baron. You don't really want to commit to it unless you've got a significant man advantage on the map. But in this particular circumstance, we use the Baron buff to end by grouping and pushing with minions. I hope this was a useful video to you. It just shows you a little walkthrough about the important stages of the game, as well as some important settings and extra bits for Wild Rift. I hope you enjoy it, and feel free to like and subscribe.